Hi, Matt. You confused me by being Alan Woolman.
Yeah, we took a walk. Hang on.
Okay.
You have a good Shabbos?
Very nice. Well, thank God.
Lovely.
I made only one mistake, which was trying to fold up my new glasses, and they're too tight.
Oh, did I tighten it up too much? Sorry.
I don't know.
I'll hang on. I've got to find the volume button.
No, it's fine. Don't worry. They're loose. So I said to everyone, "Why didn't you notice my new glasses?" It turns out they're the exact same pattern as the other ones.
Ah.
Right. Who would like to light the candle?
Thank you very much for my candle. But I didn't know we planned to be.
Okay, we've got 3 minutes to go. Huh? Hey, you're welcome. Everyone will start in a couple of minutes.
That's fine.
Right. Never muted everyone. But anyway,
I shoot you, Ronnie. Look.
2 minutes. Okay.
They went for a walk, don't you know?
Who's in charge of the lights? Oh, they've muted themselves.
Cool.
You didn't have to mute yourselves.
Really?
I was just trying to work out if it was going to be. Oh, I said that. Oh, I have. We can you can join in if you want. Okay. Who's ready for Havdolo? Who's in charge of the lights, please? Okay. Yes, they work great there. Okay.
But I can see myself telling you.
Candle never works anyway. We'll just hold the candle up. Okay, Mummy, are you coming?
Are you ready?
Yes.
You keep saying 3 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes, 1 minute.
3 minutes. 3 minutes. Oh, that's
I'm just going to change to Facebook.
Sorry?
I'm just going to change to Facebook looking at.
Okay.
All right. Be with you a sec.
Oh, that was close. Well,
Oh.
no, that's
no.
late from
Delay.
I want to play. Well, I'm very curious.
Matt has officially left us. Okay. I know he's coming. He's coming to Facebook. We'll give him a minute.
Well,
Right to Facebook.
make a difference. That's I'm just like.
They want Zoom, please.
Both.
They were on Zoom, but now they.
No one's on Zoom, but that's fine. Okay.
You might want to go
so
to
they're
Zoom.
not home. Oh, they can't.
No, they're at the Woolmans. I know. Okay.
You not here?
They went for a walk to Woolmans. Okay. All right, we're going to start. You ready?
Am I not in there? Oh, 6 people from each household. 6 people.
Ready? Yeshua si eftach v'lo yevchad ki azim rasya Adonai v'yehidi Yeshua u'shafta mayim v'sasayin Imaynei ha-Yeshua L'Adonai Yeshua Lamcha B'chasecha Sela Adonai Tzavos Imanu Miskablanu L'Heyakos Sela Adonai Tzavos Ashrei Adam B'Teyachach Adonai Hoshia Melech Aleinu B'Yom Koreinu La Yehudim Haisa Oira V'Simcha V'Sasayin Mika Kenti Elonu Kais Yeshua Isesa Ub'Shem Adonai Yekra Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam v'orei peri hagothem. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam v'orei minei v'samim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam v'orei mi'orei ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh l'choil beino l'choshech ben Yisroel lo'amim ben yom ha'shavi v'sheishes yomei hamaseh. Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh l'choil. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I want to share a quick story, which I've started doing. So I've told the story a few times in shul. This is not the story, but just by way of introduction, about the young man who had gone away from Judaism, lived in Yerushalayim from a religious family. And he, after several years of being estranged from his family, he phones up his mother one week and he says, "Mom, can I come for dinner Friday night?" He's at 19, 20 years old. She says, "Are you sure?" You know, he says, "Yeah, no, I'd like to come. I think it's time for me to return." She says, "That's great. That's fantastic, son." He says, "And I want to come to the Bet Knesset. I want to go to shul with Abba, with my father." She says, "Are you sure? No pressure." He says, "No, honestly, it's fine. You know, this is a decision I've come to on my own." So he comes, this kid who's not been to a shul in 3 years, say, in his jeans and his t-shirt, and he's got an earring and he's got a tattoo, whatever, walks into shul Friday night, goes up to his father. Before he can even reach his father, one of the regulars in the shul goes over to him and says, "Young man, is that any way to dress for shul for Shabbos?" Needless to say, the boy left and didn't come back for a very long time. obviously we have to have standards. We have to be really careful what we say to other people. Words have so much power, as we know. So I just read a beautiful story about a Rav who I've never heard of, but I've now heard of, called Rav Meir Scheinberg, who was a rabbi in the community in Flatbush, Brooklyn, New York, for many, many years, was recently passed away in April of this year. And it's a story that took place with him, which reminded me of this story. So the story goes, the story was actually told by a different rabbi who's in New Jersey called Rabbi Eisenman, who writes for Mishpacha magazine. So he writes that at one stage he was a teacher in the 8th grade, so that's year 8, that's what the bar mitzvah year. And he used to get invited to a lot of bar mitzvahs of students. And he said most of them were quite, I mean, we're going back probably 40, 50 years. So most of them were quite modest in nature. He says there was one exception. We'll call the guy Moshe for argument's sake. He says Moshe's bar mitzvah wasn't just a regular bar mitzvah. Moshe's bar mitzvah was a whole weekend-long affair at a hotel in the Catskills. Now, if you know the Catskills, besides for being associated with the entertainment industry, it's where people go, like for Pesach or for holidays. It's a bit cooler than New York City. It's upstate and it's upmarket as well. He says, never mind gefilte fish, they had Peking duck and they had, catered gourmet meals. And the entire Shabbos, he says, was opulent, extravagant, and exaggerated, completely over the top. And it reached its culmination on Motzei Shabbos. They had a Malava Malka. They had 10 different food stations with themed food from all over the world. And at the Malava Malka, says Rabbi Eisenman, the Rav of the shul from the boys' shul spoke. And amazingly, says Rabbi Eisenman, he got up, this is Rabbi Scheinberg, he praised the boy, his parents and his grandparents, and he said that it was so appropriate that they celebrated the bar mitzvah in such a befitting and modest manner. Rabbi Eisenman, who's telling the story, says he was absolutely stunned. He'd heard this rabbi speak many times. One of the things he used to speak about all the time was the necessity to avoid the materialism of America and to be simple and Hamish. And suddenly here he is at this lavish extravaganza, which is completely over the top, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he's praising them. So Rabbi Eisenman says afterwards, he went over to the Rav, Rabbi Scheinberg, and he asked him, how can you tolerate such an over-the-top, outrageous simcha, and you're even praising it? So he says the Rav took him by the hand, and they went off to speak in private. And he told him as follows. He says, Moshe is an only child. His father, Stanley, was also an only child. His grandfather, Sender Yudovitz, paid for the entire bar mitzvah. Sender was 12 years old when he was sent to Auschwitz. He promised Hashem that if he survived, he would make sure no Jewish boy would ever go without a proper bar mitzvah, unlike he himself. And for the last 30 years, Sender has paid for the bar mitzvah celebrations of countless boys. For the bar mitzvah of his only grandson, he decided he wanted to go all out to give him the bar mitzvah he himself had never had. And the Rav looked at me, says Rabbi Eisenman, very seriously. And he says, I knew that for Sender, making this fancy bar mitzvah was his ultimate revenge against the Nazis. And I could not take that away from him. I made him promise that on the same night as his grandson's bar mitzvah, he would pay for 10 bar mitzvahs in Israel for orphans. And he readily agreed. So Rabbi Eisenman continues, you're wondering why I called it a modest and fitting occasion. Why should I ruin Moshe's bar mitzvah? His grandfather considers it appropriate. I disagree. But does that give me the right he shouldn't feel good on his bar mitzvah? What would I have accomplished if I would have expressed my displeasure? It was his day to shine, and he deserved it, and that's why I called it modest and appropriate. Rabbi Eisenman says that was 30 years ago. And he says, 2 weeks ago, I bumped into Moshe, who told me that the Rav, Rabbi Scheinberg, had passed away. And then Moshe said to me, do you know, if he hadn't given me those words of encouragement at my bar mitzvah 30 years ago, if he hadn't said what he did at that Malava Malka, I don't think I'd be where I am today. With all the challenges I've faced in my life, he made me feel like $1 million that weekend. And my goal also is to repay that by giving tzedakah to others. And Rabbi Eisenman says he looked at Moshe, who is now actually a well-known philanthropist in the community, and he said to him, did that Shabbos really mean so much to you? No, Moshe said, not really. The bar mitzvah was completely over the top. But the fact my Rav was there for me, and the fact that he validated it, and he gave me such kind words, really made my day. And I've never forgotten him for that. And that was Rav Meir Scheinberg, who was nifta about 6 weeks ago. We don't realize the power of our words. It's very easy to be judgmental. It's very easy to say the first thing that comes to mind. But here you see somebody who actually, in the end, what they said was far more powerful and meaningful. And also, you don't know the story. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I thought it was a very touching story. Just makes us think, you know, we're very quick to judge situations. We don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. Anyway, a slightly less lavish bar mitzvah, but nonetheless, just as meaningful, will be taking place tomorrow night with Jeff's second bar mitzvah. So please join us from 7 o'clock on Zoom. And we wish Jeff, who I can see here, a hearty mazel.